Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Iceberg podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Iceberg or anywhere you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, and while there is plenty to discuss after a rough weekend for the Pittsburgh Penguins, we'll do a lot of that breakdown on tomorrow's full-length episode. But for today, let's get into these power rankings. Week 2 of the Tip of the Iceberg Pittsburgh Penguins Power Rankings. We got two players that have dropped from the rankings, one honorable mention, and then, of course, as we're going to do every Monday from this point until the end of the season, we'll give you our top 5 Pittsburgh Penguins of the year to this point. So let me know in the comment section who your top 5 is going into week 3 of the NHL season. First, let's start with who's dropped from the rankings, one being Anthony Beauvillier. I think it was a given that he wasn't going to stay in the top 5 all season long. This is a guy that a lot of people weren't happy with being on that top line with Sidney Crosby, with Brian Rust, and kind of in place of Drew O'Connor for that couple of games there. He had a good first week, right? He had that 2-goal game. Everything that touched his stick ended up being a shot on goal. And I thought, all right, he seems like he's an energetic person that's going to be able to kind of give Sidney Crosby a little something different on his wing. That something different just kind of started to not work. And with that, Anthony Beauvillier was dropped in the Penguins lineup, and he was dropped in the Penguins power rankings. Last week, he was ranked, I believe, 4 or 5. This week, he's no longer ranked. Same too with Cody Glass. Cody Glass is a guy who kind of in a different light than Anthony Beauvillier. He didn't drop out of the rankings because his game had dropped at any level. In fact, I mean, you look at what Mike Sullivan did yesterday. He moved him from 4th-line center to 3rd-line winger up alongside Lars Eller, getting a little bit of praise, getting a little bit of a bump in the lineup, getting a little bit of a bump when it comes to opportunity in the Penguins lineup. I still like what I've seen from Cody Glass, but there's just been some other players that have kind of stepped up and hopped Cody Glass. So both Glass and Beauvillier end up dropping from the rankings in week 2. Honorable mention before we get to the top 5 is Jesse Puljujärvi. This is a guy who I think every line he's played on, he's elevated. Speaking of opportunity, speaking of the lineup shuffle yesterday, Puljujärvi moved up into the top 6, playing with Evgeni Malkin and with Ricard Rakell, and I thought he performed well. Picked up an assist in the game, and I understand towards the tail end of this one, he was quote-unquote benched, so too really was Drew O'Connor and Brian Rust to a certain extent, because the Penguins, well, they had fallen behind and they needed quick offense. And this year, quick offense means Mike Sullivan is going to the old reliable of Sidney Crosby, Evgeni Malkin, and whoever is playing the best on both of their 2 lines. Yesterday, it just so happened to be Ricard Rakell. So that was the line the majority of the remainder of the game. 3rd line got some opportunities, but it was Crosby, Malkin, and then a winger rotating in, and Puljujärvi just didn't make that rotation. I still think that this is a guy that the Penguins think extremely highly of, and this is a guy that is having a tremendous start to the season. So honorable mention for Jesse Puljujärvi. Let's get into our top 5, and like I mentioned, leave a comment below what your top 5 is going into week 3 after 2 weeks of the 2024-25 season. Number 5, down 2 spots from last week, is Sidney Crosby. Now, I don't know if I'll ever be able to take him off the power rankings, but it certainly hasn't been the beginning to the season that we all expected. But when you look at his stats, it still looks like he's staying afloat, right? 1 goal, 6 assists in 7 games so far this season. But I think we can all say he hasn't been at his best a lot of the time this season. Some of that is due to his line mates. We already talked about Anthony Beauvillier. It took Brian Rust a handful of games to get his feet underneath him. Drew O'Connor started the first handful of games slow and has started to come on ever since. I just think that that is something that's going to need to settle itself down here over the next couple of weeks. And what better opportunity than another road trip? They fixed a lot of things on that first road trip of the season. They're out in Western Canada now, looking to fix more of those things. But some of them has also been him. I mean, I think that we can all just say that he hasn't been at his best, except for maybe the Buffalo game. That is the one game that he took over, and he was clearly the guy on the ice, him and Evgeni Malkin. And that night, he had 1 goal, 2 assists, including the game-winning goal. But I think we can all say that we expect a little bit more from Sidney Crosby. And I'm not saying he's one of the worst players on the team. I'm saying he's the 5th best player on the team still. But we always expect Crosby to be number 1 or number 2 on this list. He just hasn't been there to this point this season. I obviously see him settling in if they stick with Rust and OC on his line. I think that's a good combination with all three of those guys being great in puck battles, and with OC especially kind of hitting another level here over the last week, getting back into where we expected him to be at the start of this season. Number 4, let's go with Tricky Ricky, Ricard Rakell. Previously, he was unranked, so he makes his power rankings debut for this season. He has 3 goals and 1 assist in 7 games played. We've been saying it all week. He just looks healthier this season. That shoulder injury doesn't seem to be bothering him at all. He had 3 goals in 3 straight games. 2 of them were absolute laser beams past the opposing netminder. And then the third one on Wednesday against the Buffalo Sabres, 46 seconds left. Big moment. Who's in front of the net? Who's putting the puck in the back of the net? Ricard Rakell. He's been really good this season. And like I mentioned, that shot being back in full force, his goal scoring capabilities being back in full force is huge for the Pittsburgh Penguins. His first full year with the Pens, he had 28 goals. He has 3 already on the season. Would be great to see him get up around that goal total again, and would go a long way in making sure the Penguins end up on the right side of the playoff dot back in March or April in 2025. So Ricard Rakell, previously unranked, makes his Penguins Power Rankings debut, coming in at number 4. At number 3, down 1 spot from last week, but still, to me, the best goaltender the Penguins have trotted out there, and now they've trotted out 3. Like I said, we'll talk about that more tomorrow, but Joel Blomqvist, 4 games played, 2-2 record, a .908 save percentage, and a 3.16 goals against average to this point in the season. Simply put, he's forcing the Penguins' hand in net. Right now, on this road trip, they're running a 3 goaltender system, something that I personally didn't expect to see happening, because I personally don't like to see happening. But as of right now, they couldn't do anything with Tristan Jarry heading into this road trip. They had Alex Nedeljkovic come back, who I thought played pretty well yesterday in Winnipeg, but Blomqvist was good enough to where they said, you know what, we could send him down, or honestly, we might need him to be one of the 2 guys, and we might just healthy scratch Tristan Jarry. And that's exactly what they did. He forced their hand. They're carrying 3 goaltenders because Joel Blomqvist has been that good in his first 4 games at the NHL level. So the fact that they scratched Jarry is crazy. Obviously, it's the biggest story pertaining to the Penguins through 2 weeks of the season, but it wouldn't be nearly as big if they didn't have a guy standing on his head and they didn't have a guy stepping up in the way that Joel Blomqvist has. So down 1 spot, but still, number 3 is a good ranking for a guy who's only played in 4 games in the NHL in his entire life. Number 2, big jump for this guy. Previously unranked. Some of you probably know where I'm going with this. 4 goals, 2 assists, and 6 points in 7 games played this season. Let's go with the guy from Denmark, the captain from Denmark. Let's go with one Lars Eller. He was good last season for the Penguins, and I think we all admitted as much. He was the best the Penguins have gotten out of a third-line center since Nick Bonino's first stint ended in Pittsburgh. But he's been even better to begin this year. I mean, the offensive side of the puck has come out in spades. It's almost like it's the fountain of youth for Lars Eller. 2 multi-goal games this past week. Everybody that is on his line seems to get a little bit better. I mean, I understand it's only been 1 game, but I thought Beauvillier didn't look awful yesterday. Who was on his right side? Cody Glass certainly didn't look awful yesterday, but even before that switch, Jesse Puljujärvi was really good. Drew O'Connor struggled a little bit on the first line. He bounced down to the third line. All of a sudden, he found his game. I think a large part is due to the fact that Lars Eller has been very steady and very sturdy for the Penguins as their third line center. I said yesterday, my 3 takeaways on Twitter, that, I mean, his trade stock is just going up and up and up. If the Pittsburgh Penguins are out of a playoff spot by the trade deadline, that's probably, I mean, we'll have to wait and see what Marcus Pettersson does over this season when it comes to on the ice and when it comes to off the ice. But Lars Eller might be their best trade piece. And let's not forget, this is a team that kind of kicked off a rebuild. So that's how you have to think about some of these guys. Not now, obviously, because it's early in the season. You don't have that actual discussion until Christmas time, a little after New Year's. But Lars Eller is certainly having a red-hot start to the season. And if the Penguins team doesn't follow suit in a couple months, he might be one of their best trade chips would hate to see him go, but any contending team would love to have what Lars Eller is bringing to the Penguins on their third line. Great start to the season for him. He debuts on these power rankings at number 2. And number 1, there's no change from last week. This one goes to Gino Muschino. Evgeni Malkin for the second consecutive week comes in at number 1 on the Penguins power rankings. He has 2 goals, 9 assists in 7 games played, the best start of his 19-year NHL career. That's a crazy thing to say whenever this guy is having his best start this year and he's already had a Hall of Fame career. So great to see from Evgeni Malkin. He's been cruising through milestones left and right, and he has overall been easily, in all caps, the Penguins' best player through 7 games this season. That's almost 10% of the season that Evgeni Malkin has come out and been the best and dominated opponents over the first 7 games. So Evgeni Malkin takes the cake for the second consecutive week. He is the leader in the clubhouse with that. I mean, he's the leader in the clubhouse with 3 stars because he was the number 1 star of the week last week. And something tells me, unless something drastic happens tomorrow night against the Calgary Flames, he's probably going to take home first star of the week again this week. So that's it for the power rankings. Sidney Crosby bumps down to number 5. Ricard Rakell moves up and debuts at number 4. Yoel Blomqvist moves down 1 spot to number 3. Lars Eller debuts at number 2, and Evgeni Malkin takes it home with his second consecutive week as the number 1 player on the Tip of the Ice-Burgh Penguins power rankings. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Like I mentioned before, make sure you tune in tomorrow for a full-length episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh, breaking down everything we saw over the weekend, talking a little bit about the 3 goalie situation and everything else in between. But that's it for this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh or anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.